The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Eldoria Palace as Queen Consort Camilla adjusted her emerald tiara in the ornate mirror. Her reflection showed a woman in her 70s, still striking despite the years, but her eyes held a cold calculation that had served her well during her rise to power. Today marked exactly 1 year since her husband, King Charles, had suffered a stroke, leaving him unable to speak clearly or make complex decisions. The doctor said he might recover, but Camilla knew better. She had spent decades waiting for her moment, and she would not waste it. "Your Majesty," called her private secretary, Lord Nathaniel Ashworth, from the doorway. His voice carried the reverence she demanded, but she caught the slight tremor that betrayed his nervousness. "The Privy Council meeting has been moved to 10 o'clock. Prince William has requested to speak with you beforehand." Camilla's lips curved into what others might mistake for a smile. How thoughtful of him. "I assume this concerns the recent adjustments to the royal household staff." "I believe so, Your Majesty." He seemed quite upset about the dismissal of Lady Catherine's personal secretary and the reassignment of her security detail. The Queen Consort turned from the mirror, her silk gown rustling softly. Lady Catherine, or Kate as the common people called her, had become far too comfortable in her position as the wife of the heir apparent. The young woman's popularity with the public had grown tiresome, especially since the polls showed her approval ratings consistently higher than Camilla's own. Something had to be done about that problem, and Camilla had begun implementing her solution with surgical precision. "Tell Prince William the first will see him in the blue drawing room in 15 minutes, she instructed. "And, Nathaniel, ensure that we are not disturbed." As her secretary bowed and retreated, Camilla moved to her private desk and retrieved a leather portfolio. Inside were detailed reports from her network of loyalists throughout the palace staff, each one carefully documenting the daily activities, conversations, and contacts of every member of the royal family. Information was power, and Camilla had been collecting it for years. The file on Lady Catherine was particularly thick. The young woman had been making what Camilla considered inappropriate connections with certain members of Parliament, discussing charitable initiatives that stepped beyond the traditional bounds of royal involvement. More troubling still, Catherine had been meeting privately with representatives from the Treasury, asking detailed questions about the royal finances and the allocation of funds for various ceremonies and state visits. Prince William, unfortunately, had inherited his mother's naive idealism along with her popularity. He genuinely believed that the monarchy should evolve with the times, that transparency and modernization would secure their future. What he failed to understand was that power diluted was power lost. The people loved the mystery, the pageantry, the sense that royalty existed on a plane above ordinary concerns. Once you began explaining yourself to commoners, you became common yourself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, settling the portfolio beneath a stack of routine correspondence. Prince William stepped into the room, and Camilla noted with satisfaction that he looked haggard. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His tie slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes, and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. Good. Uncertainty was the first step toward compliance. "Stepmother," he said, his voice carefully controlled but lacking its usual warmth. The deliberate use of the formal title rather than the more familiar Camilla did not escape her notice. "William, dear boy, please sit." She gestured to the ornate chair across from her own. "You look tired. I hope Catherine isn't keeping you awake with her worries about the recent staff changes." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The changes were made without consultation with my office. Sarah has worked for Catherine for 3 years. Her dismissal was abrupt and, frankly, suspicious. Suspicious." Camilla raised an eyebrow, her tone suggesting gentle confusion rather than the sharp interest she felt. "I'm afraid I don't understand." The woman was dismissed for discussing confidential family matters with unauthorized parties. "Surely you agree that discretion is paramount in our positions." "What confidential matters?" William leaned forward slightly. Sarah's job was to manage Catherine's calendar and correspondence for charitable events. What could possibly be confidential about organizing visits to children's hospitals and literacy programs? Camilla opened the portfolio with deliberate slowness, removing a single sheet of paper. Perhaps this will clarify the situation, she said, sliding the document across the polished table. Sarah was photographed having lunch with Miranda Hofstede from the Daily Chronicle. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Given that Ms. Hofstede has been particularly creative in her recent articles about our family, I felt it prudent to minimize potential security risks. William studied the photograph, his expression darkening. The image clearly showed Sarah sitting across from a woman he recognized as one of the more aggressive royal correspondents, but the angle and quality suggested professional surveillance rather than casual observation. "How did you obtain this?" he asked quietly. "Palace security maintains routine monitoring of all staff members' public activities," Camilla replied smoothly. "It's standard protocol, established long before my time. Your grandmother was quite particular about such matters." The mention of Queen Elizabeth was calculated. William had adored his grandmother and still felt the weight of her expectations. Camilla watched as conflict played across his features, the desire to protect his wife and staff warring with his ingrained respect for royal protocol. "Even if this meeting occurred," William said finally, "you should have discussed it with me before taking action. Catherine is my wife. Her staff falls under my household. Your household falls under the crown," Camilla corrected gently. "And, at the moment, I speak for the crown. Your father's condition, while hopefully temporary, requires someone to make difficult decisions. I had hoped you would appreciate my efforts to protect the family's reputation rather than questioning my authority." The words hung in the air between them. This was the crucial moment, the point where William would either accept her expanded role or challenge it directly. Camilla waited, her expression patient, but her muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. William stood slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. "I want to see my father." "Of course, dear boy. He's in the East Wing garden room. The doctors say the fresh air is good for his circulation." She paused, as if considering something. "Though, I should mention that his speech has become more limited in recent days. The doctors are concerned about the stress of too many visitors." The implication was clear. Even access to his own father would now be regulated through her. William's face flushed with anger, but he maintained his composure with visible effort. "I'll see him this afternoon," he said firmly. "And, Camilla, I want Catherine's new secretary to come from a candidate she approves, not someone chosen by your office." "Naturally," Camilla agreed with a gracious smile. "I'll have Nathaniel provide a list of pre-approved candidates from which Catherine may choose. All have been thoroughly vetted for security and discretion." After William left, Camilla remained seated for several minutes, savoring the small victory. He had pushed back, as expected, but within acceptable parameters. More importantly, he had tacitly accepted her authority to vet his wife's staff and control access to the king. Each small concession would build upon the next until her position became unassailable. She reached for her private phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Margaret? It's me." "Yes." The meeting went as expected. "He's going to visit his father this afternoon." "No, that's fine. Actually, it's perfect. Make sure Dr. Whitmore is present for the visit. Have him emphasize Charles's need for reduced stimulation." "Exactly. And, Margaret, I think it's time we discuss the Australia tour. Catherine seems quite keen on going, doesn't she?" The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering details that would seem innocuous to any casual observer, but would systematically limit Catherine's independence and public platform. When she finally hung up, Camilla felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place. She moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where she could see groundskeepers tending to the late autumn roses. In the distance, she spotted a familiar figure walking alone along the gravel path. Lady Catherine, dressed in a simple blue coat, moved with the unconscious grace that had made her such a media darling. Even from this distance, Camilla could see the tension in the younger woman's posture, the way she kept glancing back toward the palace as if she felt watched. Which, of course, she was. Camillia's network extended far beyond the palace walls. Lady Catherine's morning walks, her private conversations with friends, even her browsing history on the palace computers, all of it was carefully monitored and cataloged. The young woman had no idea how completely her life was being observed and analyzed. The irony was delicious. Catherine had married into what she believed was a fairy tale, expecting love, purpose, and the ability to use her position to help others. Instead, she had walked into a carefully constructed web of tradition, protocol, and hidden power structures that existed solely to preserve the monarchy's authority. The pretty young wife who charmed crowds and sold magazines was useful, but only as long as she remained controllable. A knock at the door interrupted her observations. "Come in," she called without turning from the window. "Your Majesty." Lord Ashworth entered with his usual measured steps. "I have the files you requested on the Australian tour preparations. Also, the Prime Minister's office has called to confirm your meeting next week regarding the Commonwealth Summit." "Excellent." Camilla finally turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "Nathaniel, I want you to personally review the security arrangements for Lady Catherine's upcoming public appearances. I'm concerned about some of the venues that have been selected." "Certainly, Your Majesty. Are there specific concerns?" "Nothing concrete, but given the current political climate, I think we should err on the side of caution. Perhaps some of the more informal venues would be inappropriate. The community center in East London, for instance, or that school visit in Manchester. Too many variables, too many opportunities for things to go wrong." Lord Ashworth made careful notes, understanding the subtext perfectly. Community centers and schools in working-class areas were exactly the sort of venues where Catherine connected most naturally with the public, where her genuine warmth and relatability shone brightest. Eliminating these appearances would gradually shift her public engagements toward more formal, controlled environments where her natural charisma would be constrained by protocol. "I'll review the security assessments immediately," he assured her. "Should I coordinate with Prince William's office?" "That won't be necessary. I'll speak with William directly. We don't want to create unnecessary bureaucratic complications." She moved back to her desk, already planning her next conversation with her stepson. "Also, I want you to quietly reach out to our contacts at the major newspapers. Nothing obvious, you understand, just friendly conversations about the importance of accurate reporting during this transition period." The euphemism was well understood between them. The transition period referred to King Charles's incapacitation, during which Camilla was positioning herself as the de facto head of the royal family. The friendly conversations would involve carefully placed suggestions about which stories would be welcomed and which might damage the monarchy's stability during these uncertain times. As Lord Ashworth prepared to leave, Camilla added one final instruction. "And, Nathaniel, I want you to arrange a private dinner with the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's time we discussed the theoretical protocols for regency succession, purely as an academic exercise, of course." After he left, Camilla returned to her files, this time focusing on Prince William's psychological profile. The young man's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, his genuine love for his wife and family. That love made him predictable, gave her leverage that she intended to use with surgical precision. She pulled out a detailed timeline of the next 6 months, marked with carefully planned events and decisions that would gradually shift power away from William's household and consolidate it under her own authority. The Australia tour was just the beginning. After that would come staff reorganizations, budget reallocations, and a series of small but significant protocol changes that would reshape the monarchy's power structure. By the time King Charles either recovered or formally abdicated, it would be too late for anyone to challenge the new order she was creating. The crown would pass to William, of course, but the real power would remain with her. And if Catherine proved too troublesome to manage, well, there were precedents for royal marriages that simply ended. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade when Camilla finally set aside her papers and prepared for the evening's formal dinner. As she checked her appearance one final time in the mirror She allowed herself a moment of genuine satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Soon, very soon, there would be no question about who truly ruled the kingdom of Valdoria. Lady Catherine stood at the tall windows of her private study, watching the gardeners work below, while her mind raced through the implications of the morning's events. Sarah's sudden dismissal still felt surreal, like waking from a pleasant dream to find reality had shifted in disturbing ways. The young woman had been more than an assistant. She had become a trusted friend who understood Catherine's vision for modernizing royal charitable work. The official reason given for Sarah's termination was laughably thin. A lunch meeting with a journalist that had been photographed and somehow interpreted as a security breach. Catherine had attended hundreds of such meetings herself, often with the same reporters, as part of her official duties. The real message was clear. Queen Consort Camilla was flexing her newly acquired authority, and Catherine's staff was fair game. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting her replacement secretary or perhaps one of the remaining household staff. Instead, William entered, his face grave and his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. He crossed to her immediately, taking her hands in his own as he searched her expression. "I've just come from seeing my father," he said without preamble. "Catherine, something is very wrong." She felt her stomach drop. "Is he worse?" "The doctors said he was improving." "That's just it." When I arrived, Dr. Whitmore was there with 3 specialists I'd never seen before. They were discussing his cognitive decline and the need to limit his social interactions to prevent confusion and agitation. William released her hands and began pacing the small room. "But, Cat, when I spoke to him alone for just a moment, he seemed more alert than he has in weeks. He asked specific questions about you, about the children, about palace business." "That's not cognitive decline." Catherine sank into her favorite reading chair, the implications hitting her like physical blows. "You think they're medicating him? Deliberately keeping him diminished?" "I think someone is managing his care in ways that serve their interests rather than his health." William stopped pacing and turned to face her. "And I think Sarah's dismissal was just the opening move in a much larger game." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of their situation settling around them like a suffocating blanket. Catherine had grown up reading about royal intrigue in history books, but she had never imagined herself living through it. The reality was far more subtle and terrifying than the dramatic poisonings and open rebellions of centuries past. "What do we do?" she asked finally. "If Camilla has control over Charles's medical care and is systematically removing our allies from palace staff, we document everything," William said firmly. "Every conversation, every decision, every change in protocol. We build a case that can't be dismissed or explained away." He moved to the window, his expression thoughtful. "And we accelerate our timeline for the initiatives we've been planning." Catherine looked up sharply. For months, they've been quietly developing a comprehensive plan to modernize the monarchy's approach to transparency and public service. The goal was to present it to King Charles when his health improved, hoping to implement gradual reforms that would secure the institution's future relevance. Now it seemed they might need those plans as ammunition rather than proposals. "The financial transparency report?" she asked. "Among other things. If we can demonstrate that our initiatives enjoy public support and generate positive outcomes, it becomes much harder for anyone to justify reversing them." William returned to his chair, leaning forward with renewed energy. "We also need to strengthen our connections with Parliament and the media, but carefully, nothing that can be construed as political interference." Catherine nodded, her mind already working through the practical implications. "I'll need to rebuild my staff with people Camilla can't easily dismiss. Individuals with independent standing and their own connections." "Exactly. And I want you to move forward with the Australia tour planning, but on our terms. Choose venues and activities that showcase the kind of monarchy we want to build. Make it impossible for anyone to cancel without creating a public relations disaster." They spent the next hour reviewing their contacts and resources, identifying allies within the palace structure and beyond. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and sobering. They had significant support among younger staff members and several key figures in Parliament. But Camillia's network of traditional loyalists controlled most of the palace's operational machinery. "There's something else," William said as their planning session wound down. "I want to consult an independent physician about my father's condition. Someone outside the palace medical staff. Is that possible?" "It has to be. As heir apparent, I have the legal right to request a second opinion on matters affecting succession." His expression hardened. If someone is deliberately keeping him incapacitated, that's not just elder abuse. It's treason. The word hung heavy in the air between them. Treason was not a charge made lightly in royal circles, carrying implications that could destroy lives and reshape the monarchy itself. But if their suspicions were correct, if Camilla was systematically consolidating power while keeping the rightful king artificially diminished, then treason was exactly what they were dealing with. Catherine rose and moved to her private desk, retrieving a leather journal she had been keeping since Charles's stroke. "I've been documenting everything," she said, handing it to William. "Every conversation, every change in his condition, every person who's had access to him. If we're building a case, this might be useful evidence." William flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each entry. Catherine had been thorough, noting not just medical updates, but also her observations about the king's clarity during brief moments when they were alone versus his apparent confusion during formal medical evaluations. "This is excellent work," he said finally. "But, Cat, if they discover you've been keeping these records, then we'll know for certain that we're onto something." Catherine's voice was steady despite the fear she felt. "William, I didn't marry into this family to be a decorative figurehead. I won't stand by and watch someone steal power from your father and manipulate his condition for political gain." Her husband smiled for the first time that day, pride and love evident in his expression. "This is why I fell in love with you. Not because you looked perfect in a tiara, but because you have the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous." Their moment of connection was interrupted by another knock. This time Catherine called Enter with some trepidation, wondering what new crisis might be unfolding. Marcus Sterling, William's private secretary, stepped in with an expression that mixed excitement with apprehension. "Your Royal Highness, I've just received word from the Prime Minister's office. They're requesting a meeting with you tomorrow regarding the upcoming Commonwealth Summit." William frowned. That meeting was scheduled for next week, and it was supposed to include my stepmother. "Yes, sir." The change came directly from number 10. They specifically requested to meet with you alone, citing the need to discuss sensitive matters of state succession protocol. Catherine and William exchanged glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Either the Prime Minister had become aware of the palace power struggle and was choosing sides, or someone had been feeding him information designed to force a confrontation. Did they provide any additional context? William asked. Only that certain concerns had been raised about the consistency of royal representation during King Charles's recovery period. Marcus paused, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of his words. "Sir, there are rumors circulating in Westminster about the Queen Consort making independent policy commitments without consulting your office." This was exactly what Catherine had feared. If Camilla was operating as if she had full royal authority while Charles was incapacitated, she was essentially conducting a soft coup. The Prime Minister's intervention suggested that the political establishment was beginning to notice and take sides. "Schedule the meeting," William decided. "And, Marcus, I want you to prepare a comprehensive briefing on all royal activities and commitments made in the past month. Include everything: state visits, ceremonial duties, charitable patronages, the works. If there are discrepancies between what my stepmother has committed to and what my father would normally approve, I want them documented." After Marcus left, Catherine felt the weight of their situation settling more heavily on her shoulders. What had begun as concerns about staff dismissals and Medical care was evolving into a constitutional crisis that could shake the foundations of the monarchy. "There's no going back from this," she said quietly. "Once you meet with the Prime Minister and raise these concerns officially, we're committed to seeing this through to the end." William took her hands again, his grip firm and reassuring. "Kat, my father trusted me to protect this institution and this family. If I have to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, there's really no choice at all." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Together, they began planning for what would likely be the most important political battle of their lives. The stakes were nothing less than the future direction of a monarchy and their ability to serve the people who would one day be their subjects. As evening fell over Valdoria Palace, Catherine found herself thinking about the ordinary family life she had imagined when she first fell in love with William. Those simple dreams of raising their children with love and purpose seemed almost quaint now, overshadowed by the complex realities of power, duty, and political survival. But perhaps that was always an illusion. Perhaps every royal spouse throughout history had faced similar moments when they had to choose between personal safety and institutional integrity. If so, Catherine was determined to prove herself worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. The next morning would bring the Prime Minister's meeting and whatever revelations it might contain. Tonight, she and William would finalize their strategy and prepare for whatever consequences their actions might bring. The game was no longer about staff assignments and social schedules. Now, it was about the very soul of the monarchy they would someday lead. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their solemn tones echoing across the palace grounds like a call to arms. Catherine listened until the last note faded into silence, then turned her attention back to the documents, and plans spread across her desk. There was work to be done, and very little time in which to do it. Prime Minister David Harrison studied the intelligence briefing spread across his mahogany desk, his expression growing more troubled with each page. The report from his private secretary detailed a pattern of concerning developments within the royal household that had begun to alarm senior civil servants and political observers. What had initially appeared to be routine administrative changes following King Charles's stroke was beginning to look like something far more troubling. The morning light streaming through the windows of number 10 cast sharp shadows across the documents, highlighting key phrases that painted a disturbing picture. Unauthorized policy commitments, restricted access to the sovereign, systematic staff replacements, and medical information discrepancies jumped from the pages like warning signals. Harrison had served as Prime Minister for 3 years, navigating economic crises and international tensions with practiced skill. But constitutional crises involving the monarchy required a different kind of delicate maneuvering. The crown was the foundation of Britain's entire governmental system, and any instability at the top could have unpredictable consequences. A soft knock interrupted his review. "Come in," he called, recognizing the distinctive rhythm that belonged to his chief of staff. Margaret Thornfield entered with her usual brisk efficiency, carrying a fresh folder and wearing the expression that indicated urgent developments. "Prime Minister, Prince William has arrived. He's 15 minutes early, and he appears determined." Harrison set aside the briefing papers and straightened his tie. Early arrivals usually indicated either anxiety or preparation for confrontation. Given the circumstances, he suspected the latter. "Show him in, Margaret. And please, no interruptions unless it's genuinely urgent." Prince William entered the room with the bearing of a man who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to defend them. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, and his posture carried the confidence of someone accustomed to authority despite his relatively young age. Harrison had met with him several times over the years, but never under circumstances quite like these. "Your Majesty," Harrison began, using the formal address that acknowledged William's position as heir apparent. "Thank you for accommodating the schedule change. I hope the urgency didn't cause too much inconvenience." "Not at all, Prime Minister." I understand there are concerns about royal representation during my father's recovery. William settled into the offered chair with practiced ease, but Harrison could see the tension in his shoulders. I'm here to address whatever issues have been brought to your attention. Harrison opened the folder Margaret had brought, revealing a more detailed analysis than the briefing he had been reviewing earlier. Prince William, I'll be direct. We've received reports suggesting that certain commitments are being made on behalf of the Crown without proper consultation with your office. Additionally, there are questions about the consistency of information regarding His Majesty's condition and capacity. The words hung in the air between them, diplomatic language that carried explosive implications. Harrison watched William's reaction carefully, noting the flash of anger that was quickly controlled and replaced by calculated composure. Prime Minister, I appreciate your directness. It allows me to be equally frank. William leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, but carrying unmistakable steel. My stepmother has been making decisions that exceed her constitutional authority. More concerning still, I have reason to believe that my father's medical condition is being managed in ways that may not serve his best interests. The accusation was carefully worded, but unmistakably clear. Harrison felt the weight of constitutional responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. If the heir apparent was formally alleging that the Queen Consort was exceeding her authority and potentially manipulating the king's medical care, the implications were staggering. That's a very serious allegation, Harrison said carefully. Do you have specific evidence to support these concerns? William reached into his briefcase and withdrew a bound document. This is a comprehensive review of all royal activities and commitments made in the past 6 weeks. You'll find significant discrepancies between normal protocol and recent practices. Additionally, I've documented concerns about access to my father and inconsistencies in medical reporting. Harrison accepted the document, but didn't immediately open it. The act of reviewing such material would constitute official acknowledgement of a constitutional crisis, triggering protocols that could reshape the monarchy's structure. Once that threshold was crossed, there would be no return to the previous status quo. Prince William, before I examine this material, I need to understand your intentions. Are you formally requesting government intervention in royal household management? I'm requesting that the government fulfill its constitutional duty to ensure continuity of the crown, William replied firmly. If the sovereign is incapacitated and someone else is exercising royal prerogatives without proper authority, that threatens the entire foundation of our constitutional system. The response was precisely what Harrison had expected, but it still sent a chill down his spine. Constitutional crises were the stuff of history books and theoretical political science discussions. Finding himself in the middle of one felt surreal and terrifying in equal measure. I'll need to consult with the Attorney General and the Cabinet Secretary, Harrison said finally. This type of situation requires careful legal analysis and coordination with senior civil servants. Of course, but, Prime Minister, I hope you understand the urgency of this matter. Every day that irregular practices continue makes eventual resolution more difficult and potentially more damaging to the institution. Harrison nodded, already mentally reviewing the complex legal and political steps that would be required. In the meantime, I assume you'll be taking your own steps to address these concerns within the royal household? My wife and I are working to document everything and build support for proper constitutional procedures. We're also seeking independent medical evaluation of my father's condition. William paused, his expression hardening. Prime Minister, I want to be clear about something. If these concerns are validated, I intend to ensure that those responsible face appropriate consequences, regardless of their position or relationship to the family. The threat was diplomatically phrased, but unmistakably serious. William was declaring his intention to pursue justice, even if it meant exposing family members to legal jeopardy. Harrison respected the courage required for such a position, even as he worried about the potential fallout. After William left, Harrison sat alone in his office, staring at the unopened document on his desk. Opening it would begin a process that could ultimately lead to criminal charges against the queen consort, forced medical intervention regarding the king, and a complete restructuring of royal household governance. The political ramifications would be enormous, potentially affecting everything from international relations to domestic stability. But the alternative was equally troubling. If someone was indeed usurping royal authority and manipulating the king's condition for political gain, allowing it to continue would be a dereliction of his duty as prime minister. The crown's legitimacy depended on constitutional propriety, and any erosion of that foundation threatened the entire governmental system. Harrison reached for his secure phone and dialed the Attorney General's private number. "Rebecca, it's David. I need to see you immediately, along with the cabinet secretary. We have a developing constitutional situation that requires urgent legal analysis. No, this can't wait until tomorrow. This afternoon, if possible." The next few hours were a blur of hurried consultations, legal research, and careful political calculations. The Attorney General confirmed that the concerns raised by Prince William were legally significant and warranted investigation. The cabinet secretary outlined the procedural steps required for official intervention in royal household affairs, emphasizing the delicate balance between governmental oversight and royal independence. By evening, Harrison had authorized a discreet investigation into the allegations, involving senior civil servants and medical experts who could review the evidence without creating public alarm. The inquiry would focus on three key areas: the extent of Queen Consort Camilla's activities on behalf of the Crown, the consistency of medical reporting regarding King Charles's condition, and the adequacy of constitutional safeguards during periods of royal incapacitation. As he prepared to leave Number 10 that evening, Harrison reflected on the strange turns that political careers could take. When he had first sought the Prime Minister's office, he had expected to deal with economic policy, international relations, and domestic legislation. Constitutional crises involving royal power struggles had seemed like quaint historical curiosities. Now he found himself at the center of a situation that could redefine the monarchy's role and potentially expose criminal conduct at the highest levels of British society. The decisions he made in the coming days would echo through history, affecting not just the current crisis, but the future structure of constitutional government. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his chief of staff. The preliminary legal research was complete, and the findings were deeply troubling. If Prince William's allegations proved accurate, the government would have no choice but to take unprecedented action to restore constitutional order. Harrison read the message twice, absorbing the full implications of what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more evidence, and increasingly difficult decisions. The comfortable routines of normal political life were about to be shattered by the demands of constitutional duty. As his driver navigated through the London evening traffic, Harrison found himself thinking about the ordinary citizens who would ultimately be affected by this crisis. They deserved a monarchy that operated according to law and tradition, not one corrupted by personal ambition and illegal manipulation. Whatever the personal cost to those involved, that principle would guide his decisions in the challenging days ahead. The lights of Westminster fell behind them as they headed toward Harrison's private residence, but the weight of constitutional responsibility traveled with him into the night. History was watching, and the Prime Minister of Britain would not be found wanting when duty called. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived at the discreet medical clinic in South Kensington with a sense of professional duty mixed with profound unease. As one of Britain's most respected neurologists, she had treated everyone from cabinet ministers to international celebrities. But the request that had brought her here was unlike anything in her 30-year career. The call had come through the most secure channels, requesting an independent medical evaluation of a patient whose identity could not be revealed until she arrived, and signed extensive confidentiality agreements. The facility itself was unremarkable from the outside, a converted Victorian townhouse that could have housed any number of professional services. Only the sophisticated security measures and The presence of plainclothes protection officers hinted at the extraordinary nature of what was taking place within its walls. Inside, Dr. Hartwell was escorted to a private consultation room where Prince William waited, his expression grave but determined. She had treated members of the royal family before, but always within the normal protocols of palace medical care. This clandestine arrangement suggested something far more serious than routine health concerns. Dr. Hartwell, thank you for agreeing to this consultation under such unusual circumstances, William began, rising to greet her with his characteristic blend of formality and genuine warmth. I'm afraid the situation is both sensitive and urgent. Your Royal Highness, I understand the need for discretion. How can I assist you? William gestured for her to take a seat across from him, then withdrew a thick medical file from his briefcase. I need an independent evaluation of my father's neurological condition. Specifically, I want to understand whether his current limitations are consistent with the natural progression of his stroke recovery, or if there might be other factors affecting his cognition and alertness. The carefully worded request carried implications that made Dr. Hartwell's stomach tighten. She had read enough medical history to know that royal physicians had sometimes been complicit in everything from hiding terminal illnesses to facilitating illegal confinements. The suggestion that King Charles's condition might be artificially maintained or exaggerated was both professionally shocking and personally disturbing. I'll need complete access to his medical records and the opportunity to conduct a thorough examination, she said. Will the current medical team be cooperative with this evaluation? That's one of the complications. The current team has been resistant to outside consultation. They've cited patient confidentiality and the sensitive nature of royal medical care. William's jaw tightened with controlled frustration. However, I have the legal authority as heir apparent to request independent evaluation when matters of succession capacity are concerned. Dr. Hartwell opened the file William had provided, immediately recognizing the format of standard neurological assessments. What she found inside, however, was far from standard. The documentation showed a pattern of cognitive testing that seemed designed to emphasize deficits rather than accurately assess capabilities. More troubling still, the medication regimen included several drugs that could artificially impair cognitive function if administered inappropriately. These dosages seem unusually high for someone in recovery from his type of stroke, she observed, pointing to specific entries in the pharmaceutical log. And this combination of medications, it would certainly cause confusion, memory problems, and reduced alertness. That's what I was afraid you'd say. William leaned back in his chair, the weight of confirmation settling on his shoulders. Dr. Hartwell, if someone were deliberately maintaining my father in a diminished state, what would be the medical and legal implications? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Dr. Hartwell had dedicated her career to healing and protecting patients, and the possibility that fellow physicians might be participating in deliberate harm was almost too terrible to contemplate. Medically, such actions would constitute severe malpractice, possibly rising to the level of assault or attempted murder, depending on the specific intent and methods used, she said carefully. Legally, if the patient is the sovereign and the purpose is to usurp royal authority, it could be construed as treason. William nodded grimly. That's consistent with what the Attorney General's office has indicated. The question is how to prove it and, more importantly, how to intervene safely for my father's welfare. They spent the next hour reviewing the medical evidence in detail. Dr. Hartwell's analysis revealed a pattern of treatment decisions that prioritize sedation and confusion over recovery and rehabilitation. The physical therapy regimen was minimal, the cognitive stimulation exercises were inadequate, and the medication schedule seemed designed to maintain chemical dependency rather than promote healing. I can provide a written assessment that this treatment plan is not only suboptimal, but actively harmful to the patient's recovery, Dr. Hartwell concluded. However, to definitively prove intentional misconduct, I would need to examine His Majesty directly and possibly conduct some basic neurological tests. That could be arranged, but it will need to be done carefully. The current medical team has restricted access to my father, claiming that visitors cause agitation and setbacks. William's expression darkened. In fact, they've suggested that even my visits should be limited to protect his health. Dr. Hartwell recognized the classic pattern of medical gaslighting, where healthcare providers use their authority to isolate patients from family members who might question treatment decisions. In this case, the isolation served the additional purpose of preventing anyone from witnessing King Charles's actual cognitive state versus the diminished capacity being reported to government officials. Your Royal Highness, I need to ask a difficult question. If this evaluation confirms deliberate medical misconduct, are you prepared for the consequences? Exposing this situation will likely trigger a constitutional crisis and potentially result in criminal charges against some very powerful people. William's response was immediate and firm. Dr. Hartwell, my father is not just the king. He's a human being who deserves proper medical care and protection from those who would exploit his vulnerability. If exposing the truth destroys careers or reputations, so be it. The Crown's integrity depends on constitutional propriety, and that includes protecting the sovereign from those who would manipulate his condition for personal gain. The conviction in his voice reminded Dr. Hartwell why she had entered medicine in the first place. Regardless of politics, power, or personal consequences, her duty was to her patients' welfare and the principles of medical ethics. Then, we'll proceed with the evaluation. But I want independent witnesses present and complete documentation of everything we discover. If this becomes a legal matter, the evidence needs to be absolutely unassailable. As they finalized the arrangements for accessing King Charles, Dr. Hartwell reflected on the strange turns her career had taken. She had expected to spend her later years treating routine neurological conditions and perhaps teaching at medical school. Instead, she found herself at the center of what might be the most significant royal scandal in modern British history. The examination was scheduled for the following morning, during a window when the regular medical team would be attending a conference that had been conveniently arranged by Prince William's staff. The timing would allow for several hours of unobserved evaluation, enough to conduct comprehensive neurological testing and assessment of the king's true cognitive state. That evening, as Dr. Hartwell reviewed her testing protocols and prepared her equipment, she received a call that chilled her to the bone. The voice was professionally neutral, but carried an unmistakable threat. Dr. Hartwell, this is Dr. Margaret Whitmore, His Majesty's primary physician. I understand you've been asked to provide consultation services regarding the king's care. I felt it important to inform you that such consultation would be highly irregular and potentially harmful to the patient. Additionally, any breach of confidentiality regarding royal medical matters carries severe legal consequences. The call ended before Dr. Hartwell could respond, leaving her staring at her phone with a mixture of anger and determination. The attempt at intimidation only confirmed that she was on the right track and that powerful people were desperate to prevent the truth from emerging. She immediately called Prince William to report the contact. His reaction was swift and decisive. Dr. Hartwell, this confirms everything we've suspected. Dr. Whitmore has no legal authority to prevent your consultation, and her attempt to intimidate you actually constitutes evidence of the conspiracy we're investigating. His voice carried a cold anger that reminded her of his military training. Tomorrow's evaluation will proceed as planned, with additional security measures to ensure your safety and the integrity of the process. As she prepared for what might be the most important medical evaluation of her career, Dr. Hartwell thought about the oath she had taken as a young physician. First, do no harm. Tomorrow, she would have the opportunity to live up to that promise by exposing those who had violated it in the most egregious way possible. The future of the monarchy might hang in the balance, but more importantly, the life and dignity of an elderly man who deserved proper care and protection from those who would exploit his vulnerability was at stake. That was more than enough motivation for Dr. Hartwell to face whatever consequences her findings might bring. The next morning would bring answers, and With them, the evidence needed to restore justice and proper medical care to the king of Aldoria. Whatever forces had orchestrated this elaborate deception were about to face the uncompromising light of professional medical scrutiny and ethical accountability. The morning sun cast long shadows across the east wing of Valdoria Palace as Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell made her way through corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal intrigue. Today, those ancient stones would witness another chapter in the ongoing struggle between power and justice. Her medical bag felt heavier than usual, weighted not just with diagnostic equipment, but with the responsibility of uncovering what might be one of the most serious crimes in modern royal history. Prince William met her at the entrance to King Charles's private quarters, his face tense but resolute. Behind him stood two independent witnesses, a senior civil servant from the Cabinet Office, and a court stenographer who would document every moment of the examination. The presence of official observers transformed what might have been dismissed as family concerns into formal evidence gathering. Dr. Hartwell, thank you for your courage in proceeding with this evaluation, Williams said quietly. Whatever we discover today, I want you to know that you have the full protection of my office and the government. She nodded, drawing strength from his words while steeling herself for what lay ahead. Through the ornate doors, she could hear the low murmur of voices as the skeleton medical staff completed their morning routine. In 30 minutes, they would depart for their conveniently scheduled conference, leaving the field clear for independent assessment. As they waited, Catherine appeared from a side corridor, her expression mixing concern with determination. She carried a leather portfolio that Dr. Hartwell recognized as the documented evidence they had been gathering for weeks. "Doctor, I wanted to personally thank you before we begin," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the obvious strain she was under. "Whatever we find today, at least we'll know the truth about Charles's condition." The formality of using the king's given name in such circumstances spoke to the gravity of what they were attempting. This was no longer about royal protocol or family disputes. This was about justice and the protection of a vulnerable person who happened to wear the crown. At precisely 9 o'clock, the regular medical staff departed, their voices fading down the corridor as they discussed the conference presentations they would supposedly be attending. Dr. Hartwell checked her watch and nodded to William. It was time. King Charles sat in a wheelchair by the tall windows of his private sitting room, sunlight illuminating a face that showed the ravages of his supposed stroke, but also something else, an alertness in his eyes that seemed inconsistent with the reports of severe cognitive decline. As Dr. Hartwell approached, she noticed that his posture straightened slightly, and his gaze focused on her with obvious intelligence. "Your Majesty," she said gently, setting down her medical bag and taking the chair across from him. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell. Your son has asked me to evaluate your condition. Do you understand why I'm here?" King Charles looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but clear. They've been keeping me confused. The medications. Too many medications." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. William's sharp intake of breath was audible, and Dr. Hartwell saw the stenographer's fingers freeze momentarily over a keyboard before resuming their rapid documentation. Here was the king himself, confirming their worst suspicions with painful clarity. "Can you tell me what medications you've been taking?" Dr. Hartwell asked, pulling out her tablet to record his responses. Charles's answer was halting, but coherent as he described a regimen of drugs that made Dr. Hartwell's professional blood run cold. The combination was indeed designed to cause confusion, memory loss, and cognitive impairment while maintaining the appearance of stroke-related symptoms. It was a pharmacological prison, keeping the king's mind clouded while allowing his body to function well enough to avoid suspicion of outright poisoning. "Your Majesty, I'm going to conduct some basic neurological tests," she explained. "We need to establish your actual cognitive function versus what's been reported in your medical files." Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Hartwell conducted the most important examination of her career. She tested memory, cognitive function, motor skills, and speech patterns. What she discovered was both horrifying and vindicating. King Charles, when not under the influence of the excessive medications, showed minimal impairment from his stroke. His speech was slightly slurred, and his left side showed some weakness, but his mind was sharp and his memory intact. "Doctor," Charles said during a break between tests, "I need you to understand something. Camilla has been meeting with people, making decisions. I hear them sometimes when they think I'm too sedated to understand. She's been planning this for months." William moved closer to his father's chair, his face pale with rage and sorrow. "Father, why didn't you try to tell us sooner?" "I tried, son, but every time I became too alert, too coherent, they would increase the medications. Said it was for my own good, to prevent agitation and setbacks." Charles's voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if articulating the truth was helping to clear the chemical fog from his mind. "There were days when I could barely remember my own name, but I could always hear them talking about the future, about how things would be different once I was no longer capable of ruling." The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This wasn't just medical malpractice. It was a systematic campaign to incapacitate the sovereign while positioning Camilla as the de facto ruler. The medications had been carefully calibrated to keep Charles confused enough to be manipulated, but not so impaired as to trigger immediate medical intervention. Dr. Hartwell completed her assessment with growing fury at the violation of medical ethics she was documenting. Her preliminary report, dictated to the stenographer while Charles rested, painted a picture of deliberate pharmaceutical abuse designed to facilitate political manipulation. "Based on my examination," she stated for the official record, "His Majesty King Charles is suffering from mild cognitive impairment consistent with a stroke, but his current condition has been artificially exaggerated through inappropriate medication management. The drugs currently in his system are contraindicated for stroke recovery and appear to have been administered to maintain cognitive confusion rather than promote healing." As she spoke, William was already on his secure phone with the Prime Minister's office. The evidence they had gathered was conclusive, and the time for discreet investigation was over. The government would need to act swiftly to restore proper medical care and address the constitutional violations that had been perpetrated. "Prime Minister," William said when the call connected, "we have confirmation. My father has been systematically drugged to maintain artificial incapacitation while the Queen Consort assumed unauthorized control over royal functions. We need immediate intervention to ensure his safety and restore constitutional order." The response was swift and decisive. Within hours, government medical experts arrived to take over King Charles's care, carefully managing his withdrawal from the inappropriate medications while documenting every aspect of his recovery. Legal officials began preparing charges that would shake the monarchy to its foundations. Queen Consort Camilla's reaction to these developments was as dramatic as it was revealing. When confronted with the evidence of her conspiracy, she initially denied all knowledge of any medical misconduct. As the proof mounted, however, her defense shifted to claims of acting in the monarchy's best interests during a crisis of leadership. The arrest, when it came, was conducted with all the formality and discretion that such an unprecedented situation demanded. Camilla was charged with conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, abuse of royal authority, and violations of the Official Secrets Act. Her network of conspirators, including Dr. Whitmore and several palace staff members, were taken into custody as the full scope of the plot was revealed. For King Charles, the recovery process was both physical and psychological. As the inappropriate medications were carefully withdrawn under proper medical supervision, his natural cognitive abilities reasserted themselves. The improvement was dramatic and vindicated everything that William and Catherine had suspected. Within a week, he was able to conduct limited royal duties under medical supervision, and within a month, he had resumed most of his constitutional responsibilities. The public revelation of the conspiracy sent shockwaves through British society and the international community. The idea that someone had attempted to usurp royal authority through medical manipulation was almost too extraordinary to believe, Yet the evidence was overwhelming, and the legal proceedings were conducted with complete transparency. Prince William and Catherine emerged from the crisis with their reputations enhanced and their commitment to constitutional principles proven beyond doubt. Their willingness to risk family relationships and political stability in service of justice and proper governance demonstrated the kind of leadership that would serve the monarchy well in future decades. As for the monarchy itself, the crisis ultimately strengthened the institution by demonstrating its ability to police itself and maintain constitutional propriety even under the most challenging circumstances. The reforms that William and Catherine had been planning were implemented with renewed urgency, bringing greater transparency and accountability to royal operations. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell received the Order of Merit for her role in exposing the conspiracy and protecting the king's welfare. Her courage in the face of intimidation and her commitment to medical ethics had literally saved the monarchy from one of the most serious internal threats it had ever faced. The trials that followed were conducted with meticulous attention to due process and legal propriety. Camilla and her co-conspirators were convicted on multiple charges and received sentences that reflected the severity of their crimes against both the crown and an elderly, vulnerable individual. In the end, the conspiracy's failure served as a powerful reminder that the British constitutional system, while complex and sometimes archaic, contained safeguards that could protect even the highest office in the land from those who would abuse it for personal gain. The crown endured, stronger and more legitimate than before, while justice was served for all those who had participated in its near subversion. King Charles, fully recovered and wiser for his ordeal, ruled for several more productive years before voluntarily passing the crown to William, confident that the monarchy was in capable hands and that the lessons learned from this crisis would protect future generations from similar threats. The kingdom of Aldoria had weathered its greatest internal storm in centuries and emerged with its honor and integrity intact.